Guys, did you recently get your PSAT scores back? And are you wondering what it might take in order to qualify for a National Merit Commended Student or semifinalist or other status? If so, in this video, I'm going to talk about my predicted National Merit cutoffs for the 2020-2021 testing PSAT season, as well as certain factors that I think are relevant to the discussion and may influence outcomes in this year's competition overall. If you're wondering who I am, my name is Brooke, and I've been teaching the SAT and PSAT for over a decade and a half. I've scored perfectly on an SAT as an adult. I was a National Merit finalist when I was in high school. Woohoo! And I've also scored perfectly on the ACT. I've coached students to perfect scores, more importantly, on the most recent SAT, as well as a couple of students to perfect scores on the recent ACT. We also have a couple of students on our online course that have scored perfectly on the ACT. You can check out our online courses, which have all of my test prep advice rolled into them and can really help you score higher at SupertutorTV.com. We've also got a couple of books for the ACT math section. If you happen to be taking that test, I recommend you check those out on Amazon. We're also on social, and so please check us out there. And finally, subscribe to our mailing list. It's totally free, and if we have any awesome deals on our courses or anything cool going on with Super Tutor TV, that's the place that you can find out about it. So SupertutorTV.com/subscribe. Awesome. Announcements over. Now it's time for National Merit discussion. Okay, so if you're wondering what National Merit means or is, basically there's a scholarship competition that goes on every year that you can qualify for if you get a high PSAT score. And essentially, you can get scholarships for college. So this is a great program, not just because you can make some money, but you can also earn some, badges on your sash, so to speak, that can help you in your college admissions game. So to qualify for National Merit, you've got to be a junior when you take the PSAT, and you're a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. And you generally have to have a good GPA. And if you get a qualifying score, you can get a status as a semifinalist. And then the semifinalists, there's like about 16,000 semifinalists out of 1.5 million people who are going to enter or be qualified to enter this competition. In order to move on to finalist status, almost everybody gets to move on to finalist status. There's some hoops you have to jump through. There's some paperwork you have to fill out. You've got to usually take an ACT or an SAT to confirm your score, though I think that might be waived because of COVID. The other thing to note about the PSAT National Merit Scholarship qualifying stuff is that to qualify for a National Merit Scholarship or semifinalist status, everything is done according to cutoffs that are state by state. So if you live in California, it is harder to become a National Merit Scholar than if you live in Oklahoma. If you live in DC, it is harder than if you live in Wyoming. And that's because the percentiles vary state to state. They're trying to include people from every state. They take about the top 1% of students from each state. So that makes the numbers a little bit different state by state. And that's what I'm talking about when I say National Merit cutoffs. In terms of the factors that influence where the cutoff fluctuates to, that's kind of what I'm going to talk about in this video. Now, in 2019, we saw the cutoff drop in almost every state in the country between 1 and 4 points. That's because for some reason, last year, people on the PSAT were scoring lower. Now, this year is particularly different because of COVID-19, and that throws a whole other wrench in this prediction equation. Because of COVID-19, many high schools have canceled the PSAT, and many others have rescheduled it to a January test date. That January test date may or may not happen because COVID cases are on the rise, and though vaccines are here, it's quite possible that there will be surges of cases in January that are going to force closures of schools or of school events in many places and will potentially cause cancellation of planned PSATs in January for many students. What that means is the bottom number of the denominator in the National Merit competition may be lower this year than it ever has been before. That means if they're sticking to their numbers of how many honorees they want to choose, they're going to have a smaller pool to choose those people from. In turn, that leads me to my first and easiest prediction in this video, which is that this year is going to be the easiest darn year to be a National Merit Commended Student or finalist or semifinalist if you actually can sit down and take the PSAT or alternatively take an SAT as a qualifying exam. In any case, what does it mean for the selection index? Now, that's a trickier question. Now, some of you are like, Brooke, what the heck is a selection index? Let's talk about selection index. The selection index is basically twice the sum of all of your converted scores for the reading, the writing language, and the math section. Each of those three sections counts equally in the selection index. Notice that that's different than your typical PSAT or SAT score, right? On the SAT or the PSAT, you add your reading and writing scores together and multiply by 10, and then that's your reading and writing score, and you take your math score and you double it and multiply by 10, and then that's your math score, right? So your math and your reading and writing both count equally. So reading and writing is 50% of your score, math's 50% of your score. In a selection index, the math is 1/3 of your score, the writing and language is 1/3, and the reading is 1/3. So the distribution is somewhat different, and that can sometimes rock the boat depending on what particular section you're best at. In any case, how do you calculate it? Well, you're going to get a score from 8 to 38 in each of those sections that you can see on your score reports. And then you simply add all those 8 to 38 range scores together, and then you multiply that sum by 2. That's the easiest way to find your selection index. Will the selection index be more forgiving? Because we potentially have a smaller sample size of students taking the test, and we think they may be sticking to the outcome numbers that they originally promised, we're not quite sure whether they're going to be shuffling just as many kids into the bucket of national merit as they used to, or if they're going to stick to percentiles. And depending on what decision the National Merit Scholarship Corporation goes with, that's going to impact how that selection index fluctuates. And we're not going to know until they make a decision in terms of how they're going to deal with that. And they might not even have made the decision yet because they don't know how many kids are taking this test until January comes and the PSAT is finished in January. I would argue that they're more likely to hold up the numbers than percentiles. And the reason that I think that that might be true is given the COVID situation, a lot of people may be disincentivized to take the PSAT, and the only people who really care about it are probably the people who might actually qualify for a National Merit Award. So those people are going to be more likely to try to compete than people who have no shot. So because of that circumstance, even though the denominator number is lower, because the competitive kids are the ones most likely to fight to try to take the test or to take an alternative test, I would think that it's only fair to try to sustain the number of qualified candidates rather than go by a percentile of total PSAT takers. Just, speculation, but that's kind of my take on it. So we'll see what happens. Now, I want to talk about the curve on this year's test so far from the 2 October test dates, which is certainly different from 2019. 2019, we saw this puzzling drop in selection indexes across the board. So that means naturally in 2020, I would expect there to be a rebound of 1 to 4 points for every state or territory because the College Board might be trying to rebound and make up for that or somehow accommodate given the test. We can already see in the grading scales of last year versus this year a bit of a correction potentially, because this year's test, you can miss several items and still get a perfect score in the reading and the writing and language, at least for the first PSAT test date, and you can even miss a question or two on the second PSAT as well, which was not true of the PSAT exams last year. And what that means is some of the advantage that I was talking about earlier, how I think this is the best year ever to try to become honored by national merit, it may already be built into your score because the curve is very kind right now and you can miss several questions and still have a higher score. That is the only reason that I'm not confident in predicting that the bar is going to lower in terms of selection index this year. Why it's so hard to predict is COVID-19. I still think because of COVID-19 complicating factors, you may find lower selection indexes in the year of 2020 to 2021 simply because of COVID-related factors. We don't know. In addition to what I've already talked about with COVID, I think there's also a potential to see the index go down in terms of cutoffs because of the online school factor and the mask factor. A lot of people are in online school and we see a drop in GPAs. We have a whole video on that issue if you want to check it out, but I think that issue also might show up statistically significantly on the PSAT. Wearing masks and taking a test during a pandemic, I found that a lot of my students, for example, have more anxiety this year taking tests because of the situation, because it's stressful. I think that's going to potentially offer a statistically significant drop in scores. And all that means that you could potentially score lower and still make the team, so to speak, for national merit, in my estimation. There's one last factor that I think might influence your ability to become a National Merit Scholar this year, and that's the test prep factor. Because I run an online test prep course, I'm aware that COVID-19 has statistically depressed our industry of test prep overall. So what that means is with fewer people prepping, there's going to be fewer people prepared for the PSAT. And that means there's more opportunity to do well and to become a National Merit Commended student or a National Merit Scholar than ever before. So if you do have that January test left and you haven't, gotten in on this game yet, or if you haven't been able to take a PSAT and you're thinking about taking the SAT in March, my advice to you guys is start prepping and get on the bandwagon, because you are going to have a comparative advantage over kids from other years. Not as many people are prepping. You can take advantage of this situation and turn it toward the good of you. So just a little advice for you guys. It could pay off more than it ever has before. So I recommend that you start and you study and you do it, because the relative advantage could be awesome. So I hope you guys liked this video. If so, please give it a thumbs up. I hope you guys will stay tuned to our channel, and I will see you soon. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Bye-bye.